When you think of global security hotspots, where does your mind typically go? Maybe the simmering tensions of Asia or the shifting allegiances in Eastern Europe. What if we told you there's a region rapidly moving to the absolute forefront of global geopolitical interest? A place that, well, for a long time was often considered strategically less important by major powers. We're talking about Africa. And it's not just moving to the forefront, it's demanding attention dramatically and, frankly, urgently. Today, in this deep dive, we're going to explore the evolving and, yeah, escalating strategic interests that major international organizations, specifically NATO, now have in Africa. Our mission here isn't just to lay out what's happening or even why it's happening, but to unravel the complex, often paradoxical web of reasons behind this monumental shift. And crucially, we're going to pull back the curtain on a sophisticated analytical tool. A tool that's designed to help decision makers navigate this incredibly dynamic and often volatile new landscape. This isn't just about understanding the what of geopolitics. It's profoundly about the how strategic decisions are made, or maybe how they should be made, in a truly complex world. Moving beyond intuition, to data-driven insights.
That's precisely it. For too many years, Africa was, for many global power blocs, largely an afterthought, sort of on the sidelines of the grand chess game of international relations. But that era is decidedly over. It's undeniable now. This continent, often described as NATO and the European Union's vital southern neighbor, holds immense and growing potential to influence Euro-Atlantic security, whether that influence turns out to be positive or negative. And as you highlighted, we'll be using a highly structured, almost scientific approach specifically, multi-criteria analysis, to reveal the strategic pathways and considerations that organizations like NATO are now wrestling with. It's about moving past generalized assumptions and getting into precise data-driven understanding.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When we look at what's fundamentally shifted, what are the core drivers that have propelled Africa into such a central, almost urgent position in global security discussions, especially just in the last decade or so? What are, say, the three main reasons that stand out?
Well, our analysis points to three critical, deeply interconnected reasons that have really reshaped Africa's strategic importance. The first is a burgeoning new resource race, and this is directly sparking intense geopolitical competition across the continent. We're witnessing a rapid increase in political and economic interest in Africa, and almost immediately following that, you see raised military presence, primarily from major regional powers like China, Russia, and Iran. These actors are engaging through numerous indirect and direct activities, often unfortunately aimed at influencing or even controlling certain African leaders and political elites who may already be operating under conditions of, well, widespread corruption. This heightened interest and the accompanying presence, it wasn't accidental. It really accelerated with the discovery of vast, often easily accessible gas and oil reserves in a number of African states. Think about countries like Libya, Nigeria, Sudan, Angola, Algeria, Egypt. These are now firmly established as holding some of the biggest petroleum and natural gas reservoirs on the international stage.
Huge reserves, right.
Exactly, but the scramble isn't limited to fossil fuels. The continent is also an extraordinary treasure trove of other critical minerals essential for modern tech and industry. Things like diamonds, copper, nickel.
Stuff you get for batteries, electronics.
Precisely. And this resource bounty has tragically exacerbated a regional fight for control. It's led to widespread illegal resource trafficking. And disturbingly, it's also deepened corruption and entrenched dictatorial regimes in these resource-rich nations. We see this dynamic playing out in nations across the continent, from Congo-Brazzaville and the Central African Republic to Equatorial Guinea, Tunisia, Côte d'Ivoire, Cameroon, Congo-Kinshasa, Mauritania, Morocco, South Africa, Ghana, Benin, Ethiopia, the list goes on. The sheer scale and diversity of these resources mean Africa has quickly become a key battleground for both economic and strategic influence, really shaping global power dynamics.
That's a truly significant shift from prior decades, isn't it? When the global energy and mineral resource focus was arguably elsewhere. So resource race is number one. What's the second major reason for Africa's ascendance on the global security stage?
The second reason, equally disturbing, is the alarming proliferation of terrorism and illicit activities across the continent. Even as the world grappled with the COVID-19 pandemic, international terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, they've skillfully exploited the existing instability. They've found what are described as real safe havens, particularly in North Africa and the vast Sahel region. These groups are incredibly opportunistic. They are adept at leveraging local corruption and manipulating vulnerable populations for both financial gain and human recruiting. They often seamlessly integrate with local paramilitary forces, militias, criminal organizations, allowing them to assert control over a vast array of illegal activities.
So it's not just attacks. It's like building a whole shadow economy.
Exactly. This isn't just about direct violence. It's fundamentally about establishing parallel, illicit economies that undermine state authority and societal well-being. We're talking about massive operations involving arms trafficking, drug smuggling, human trafficking. They even resort to taxing tourists in areas under their sway, effectively running their own shadow governance. Beyond that, they are deeply involved in environmentally devastating illicit businesses, things like unregulated fishing, the illegal trade in rare animals, widespread deforestation.
Wow.
All these activities further destabilize already fragile ecosystems and local livelihoods, and critically, they generate substantial illicit revenue that directly fuels their ongoing operations. So the threat is multifaceted, exploiting every vulnerability to consolidate power and fund their destructive agendas.
So it's not just the direct kinetic threat of terrorism, but this insidious way these groups exploit and degrade the very fabric of society and the economy, creating a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of instability and despair. That's a critical point. And what's the third factor, perhaps the most pervasive one contributing to this increased importance?
The third, and arguably one of the most critical long-term factors, is the devastating and accelerating impact of climate change. While global warming is a universal phenomenon affecting every corner of the world, its effects are felt most profoundly and immediately in Africa. They manifest directly as severe food insecurity, widespread poverty, and large-scale population relocation, creating new waves of internal and cross-border displacement.
Huge migration pressures.
Absolutely. The climate crisis is fundamentally altering rainfall patterns, leading to significant rising temperatures, and triggering a dramatic increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. We see irrefutable evidence of this in the alarming desertification gripping the Horn of Africa and the island of Madagascar. That's a direct consequence of continuous warming and unsustainable land use.
Right.
There's also the very real and often underestimated threat of rising ocean levels from melting glaciers globally, and even the melting of Africa's own mountain glaciers, which further exacerbates coastal erosion and displacement for communities along the vast African coastline. Furthermore, the emergence of extreme weather events like the unprecedented floods or droughts seen in various parts of the continent serve as stark reminders of the volatile climatic shifts occurring.
It just piles on the pressure.
It does. These severe environmental pressures have, tragically, compounded an already precarious socioeconomic situation across the continent, directly worsening the health crisis that was already brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. This creates a cascade of humanitarian challenges, pushing millions to the brink and further destabilizing regions already struggling with conflict and poverty.
Wow. So you have this incredibly powerful, almost apocalyptic confluence of factors. A global scramble for critical resources, the entrenchment of sophisticated terrorists and criminal networks, and the accelerating, devastating effects of climate change. It creates this truly volatile, interconnected environment, doesn't it? And as we mentioned earlier, for such a long time, Africa was considered less important in the global strategic calculus. Major powers focusing their strategic attention and competition predominantly on Eurasia, the Americas, Oceania. This is a complete reversal. It begs the question, how do these global trends, these powerful forces, intersect in Africa to create this new strategic landscape? What stands out to you as the most impactful in this dramatic shift?
What's truly fascinating here, and perhaps most paradoxical, is that despite Africa's immense natural wealth, all those oil, gas, diamond, copper reserves we just talked about, the continent is so frequently described as a poor continent. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where the real complexity and the depth of the challenge begins. It's a profound paradox. Africa is inherently rich in resources, yet many of its nations and their populations struggle with widespread poverty.
The resource curse.
Exactly, the resource curse. That's the term widely used. The core idea is that Africa's wealth doesn't automatically translate into widespread development or improved living standards for its people. Instead, it's often due to a long history of external exploitation, stemming from the colonial era and continuing, in new forms, long after decolonization. Foreign powers, multinational corporations, they continue to extract natural resources without sufficient reinvestment or equitable benefit for local populations.
And it's not just external.
No, it's not solely external forces at play. There are also significant internal causes that exacerbate this situation. Deep-seated ethnic, tribal, religious conflicts, the persistent presence of political guerrillas, rampant corruption within governance structures, and of course the scourge of terrorism we discussed earlier, which often thrives in these environments. On the external side, there's also a notable lack of truly robust regional solidarity among African nations, persistent imperfections in collaborative tools, mechanisms, and the enduring challenge of unbalanced trade exchanges, where African nations have little control over the pricing and distribution of their own raw materials. This is further compounded by vast illegal trade networks that siphon off wealth.
Can you give some examples of where this plays out?
Sure, we see this clearly in countries like Libya. Despite holding Africa's largest oil reserves, it remains entangled in what seems like an unsolvable civil war, fueled by proxy states and external interest. Nations like the Central African Republic, Congo-Brazzaville, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Mali, all undeniably rich in natural resources, are paradoxically unable to leverage these assets for their own economic development. Due to persistent internal turmoil, military coups, chronic instability. Even Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer and the continent's most populous nation, is caught in a chronic economic and social crisis, failing to truly benefit from its vast oil wealth. Experts who study resource management in underdeveloped states have pointed out at least 3 adverse consequences of this curse. Firstly, resource wealth often leads to the emergence of what's known as rent, essentially, unearned income from resources. This rent then becomes a primary means for totalitarian regimes to maintain power without true accountability to their people.
Because they don't need taxes?
Exactly. They don't need to tax or respond to citizens for revenue. Secondly, this system greatly favors corruption and clientelism among ruling elites, allowing them to amass vast personal fortunes. And thirdly, ultimately, this resource wealth paradoxically becomes a significant factor in triggering military coups and perpetuating civil wars, as various factions vie for control over these lucrative resources. The income generated from Africa's natural resources, oil, diamonds, copper, nickel, actually serves to maintain what's called a neo-patrimonial post-colonial state model.
Neo-patrimonial, meaning
Where ruling classes dangerously confuse national wealth with their private interests. This leads to an unequal accumulation of wealth, disproportionately divided among privileged political or tribal clans. This in turn fuels extreme poverty for the majority, drives desperate migration, and even contributes to the rise of terrorism, effectively providing the economic roots for many of Africa's ongoing crises and conflicts.
So the very wealth itself, the continent's natural bounty, becomes a fundamental liability rather than a source of development, perpetuating instability. It's a truly tragic and cyclical problem.
And speaking of wealth and its siphoning away, there's a staggering point made about the actual financial flows in and out of the continent. It absolutely challenges a common perception about Africa's economic status, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a statement that cuts right to the core of the issue. A leading voice in global justice famously stated, "Africa is rich, but its riches are being stolen." This isn't just a provocative statement. It's backed by incredibly striking data that upends common assumptions. When you look at the financial flows, about $162 billion annually enters Africa. This comes in various forms: foreign investment, development loans, remittances sent home by the African diaspora, international aid.
Sounds like a lot coming in.
It does sound like a significant amount, suggesting support, right?
Yeah.
But here's the truly shocking part. Approximately $203 billion leaves the continent each year.
Leaves. Well, let's break down how that massive $203 billion outflow occurs. A substantial $68 billion vanishes directly through illicit financial flows, primarily tax evasion by corporations and wealthy individuals.
$68 billion.
Just gone.
Gone. Another $30 billion is repatriated by multinational corporations as profits. Essentially, earnings leaving the continent without sufficient local reinvestment or benefits for the communities where the resources were extracted. Then there's an estimated $29 billion stolen annually through illegal deforestation, illicit fishing, the illegal wildlife trade. Activities that don't just deplete natural environments, but also devastate local economies and future prospects.
And climate change costs, too.
Yes. Adding to that burden, a staggering $36 billion represents the additional cost Africa pays each year for climate change damages to its societies and economies. This cost is disproportionately borne by a continent that has contributed least to global warming, yet suffers its most severe consequences.
So wait, if $162 billion comes in and $203 billion goes out, that creates a net deficit for Africa. The continent effectively pays out $41 billion more than it receives each year. Africa is a net creditor to the world. in stark contrast to the narrative of perpetual dependency on aid.
That completely flips the script.
It does. When you sum it up, these illegal financial flows alone amount to about 6.1% of Africa's GDP. To put that into perspective, that's 3 times more than all the international community aid sent to Africa combined. Furthermore, over $50 billion in external loans to African governments and the private sector, often driven by speculation or strategic interests rather than genuine development, are quickly transforming into huge debts that are proving incredibly difficult for these nations to repay, further trapping them in a cycle of dependency.
And internal corruption.
Just as grim. An estimated 165,000 Africans collectively hold wealth totaling $860 billion. And of that staggering sum, over $500 billion is reportedly hidden in safe havens outside the continent. This means Africa's corrupt economic system effectively allows a tiny minority of individuals to become extraordinarily rich, while the collective wealth of the continent's peoples is systematically siphoned away, leaving the majority in poverty and perpetuating the very conditions that lead to instability. It's a systemic leakage that undermines all development efforts and, crucially, creates the very instability that NATO and other global actors are now confronting.
It paints a picture not of inherent poverty, but of systematic plunder, a fundamental structural challenge that underpins so much of the continent's instability and vulnerability. How is this relentless financial drain combined with the other factors we've discussed, terrorism, climate change, and broader global events like the pandemic? How has all that shaped Africa's current tumultuous security landscape?
The tumultuous security landscape on the continent has indeed been significantly exacerbated by both the coronavirus pandemic and the accelerating impacts of global warming. These two factors haven't just influenced economic and social situations. They've directly affected the actions of parties involved in various military conflicts and terrorist activities, making it incredibly difficult for the international community to control or even adequately respond.
So things are generally getting worse, not better.
In many areas, unfortunately, yes. In North Africa and the Sahel, recent years have been characterized by the emergence of new, virulent conflicts alongside the continuation of existing ones. While some conflicts have seen, perhaps, a diminished intensity of belligerent actions and increased international involvement, most have unfortunately amplified in magnitude and disaster. The continued spread of SARS-CoV-2 and the intensifying effects of global warming have only deepened the disastrous humanitarian situation across vast swaths of the continent, even leading to widespread famine in some areas, a truly dangerous phenomenon for humanity in the 21st century. For instance, in Libya, despite some security measures, the civil war continues to simmer, fueled by regional powers and external interests, with unrest spreading to neighboring countries in Africa and Europe.
And further south.
Further south, the situation in Ethiopia's Tigray region has been tragically exacerbated by escalating conflict, ongoing for over a year now, leading to a state of emergency and immense humanitarian suffering. The involvement of neighboring Eritrea has only inflamed the situation, amplifying actions by the Tigray ethnic group against both regular forces and other neighboring tribes. In Sudan, after a hopeful peace agreement in late 2020, a military coup in October 2021 abruptly dissolved the government and imposed a state of emergency.
Shocking.
It was. It shockingly halted any attempt at democratization and endangered the financial stability and security of Persian Gulf states who had invested heavily in Sudan's democratic transition. The conflict in Mali and the Central African Republic, or CANR, continues to worsen despite international efforts from the UN and the AU. In Mali, the military leadership is stubbornly dragging its feet on restoring civilian democratic rule, clinging to power. In CANR, government forces are not only unwilling to give up the services of the controversial Russian Wagner group,
Right.
but have reportedly engaged in atrocities against peacekeeping forces, further complicating international efforts. Even the Western Sahara Peace Agreement, reached with such difficulty in 1991, is now at significant risk of breaking down, threatening renewed conflict in a historically fragile region. We've also seen very recent coups in Guinea and Chad, where military juntas violently seized power, disrupting nascent democratic processes. These undemocratic acts, magnified by the adverse effects of the pandemic, have disastrous repercussions on the socioeconomic situation, causing significant concern for major economic and security powers like the USA, Russia, and France.
It sounds like external actors often make things worse, not better.
That's often the case. A critical underlying issue here is the existence of deeply divergent and often conflicting interests among regional powers and neighboring states. These varied interests frequently prevent the peaceful resolution of crises and conflicts, particularly hindering the vital return to democratic governance. You can observe this clearly in Libya, where Turkey is keen to maintain its deployed military forces and strategic influence, or in Sudan, where generals receive direct support from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt, complicating external mediation. In Ethiopia, the interventions of Eritrea, Sudan, and Somalia have demonstrably deepened the humanitarian crisis.
In France,
Yeah.
Russia.
Their involvement is complex, too. Even France's politico-military involvement in its former colonies, like Mali and Chad, hasn't consistently led to conflict resolution. Instead, it has, in some cases, inadvertently enabled French-trained and equipped local militaries to seize power by force. A similar dynamic is seen in CAR, where Russia's robust support through the Wagner Group has significantly worsened tensions with UN peacekeepers. The United States, too, has played a role with its involvement in the Western Sahara region, supporting Morocco in exchange for the recognition of the State of Israel. These external and regional interferences effectively turn internal conflicts into proxy battlegrounds, making genuine resolution elusive.
And the extremist groups feed on this chaos.
Absolutely. The continued activities of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Boko Haram, alongside the emergence of local terrorist groups affiliated with them, often funded by international actors, pose a severe and existential socio-economic challenge for African states. This phenomenon has been tragically exacerbated by the recent surge in coups and the ongoing pandemic, which have had devastating economic effects, pushing vast numbers of Africans back into the grinding poverty they had begun to escape after 2 decades of sustained economic growth. Moreover, the long-term effects of climate change have led to increasing social and economic fragility, intensifying resource conflicts as communities compete for dwindling vital assets like water and arable land, creating a vicious cycle of scarcity and violence.
It sounds incredibly bleak. Is there any good news, any hope?
Well, it's not entirely without hope. Despite this worrying trend of coups undermining democracies, there are glimmers of positive socio-political development that offer a counter-narrative. For instance, Burkina Faso managed to hold free and incident-free local elections in May 2021, demonstrating a commitment to democratic processes. And in countries like Niger and Zambia, we've witnessed peaceful and legitimate transfers of power from military to civilian rule following presidential elections in 2021, proving that democratic progress is still possible amidst the profound challenges. But overall, the continued effects of the coronavirus pandemic and accelerated climate change have profoundly influenced African military conflicts and worsened socioeconomic conditions, creating significant implications for regional stability and, by direct extension, Euro-Atlantic security.
So, given this incredibly intricate, deeply volatile, and financially exploited situation, what is NATO's strategic response? And how does an alliance designed primarily for collective defense in Europe even begin to tackle challenges like this in Africa? Challenges that fundamentally reside outside its traditional area of operations. This raises a critical question. NATO has had some, let's say, decidedly unsuccessful experiences in or near Africa in the past, often attributed to a lack of a well-defined common strategic interest among its members. So how do they overcome that internal hurdle, and what cutting-edge tools are they using to figure out the most effective path forward?
That's precisely the core dilemma for NATO, and it's a profound geopolitical issue. Historically, the alliance has had a very limited and at times challenging engagements in or near Africa. For example, in 2001, in direct response to 9/11, NATO launched Operation Active Endeavor in the Mediterranean, a counterterrorism.
Right, active endeavor.
It lasted until 2016 and eventually evolved into Sea Guardian, which is still active today. Then, at the 2008 Bucharest summit, allies decided to support international efforts against piracy in the Gulf of Aden, leading to Operation Ocean Shield from 2009 to 2016. That operation was successfully deemed complete when piracy risks significantly diminished off Somalia.
Ocean Shield, okay.
The most controversial engagement, perhaps, was Operation Unified Protector in Libya in 2011. At the express request of member states like France, NATO secured a no-fly zone, which ultimately facilitated the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi.
With huge consequences.
Exactly. Huge, far-reaching, and often negative consequences for the stability of the entire region, as we've vividly seen with the ongoing civil war and the proliferation of arms and instability across the Sahel. Since then, NATO has mostly conducted only limited support actions for the African Union, and crucially, only at the AU's explicit request. This cautious approach is largely due to significant political and legal constraints imposed by the Washington Treaty, the alliance's founding document, which places Africa largely out of the established SACEUR's area of responsibility.
SACEUR being the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe.
Correct, whose traditional operational area has historically been focused on the Euro-Atlantic space. This is the fundamental geopolitical issue for NATO: whether to intervene militarily in Africa outside its traditional AOR and at whose request. Be it individual member states like France or Italy, or larger international organizations like the UN, EU, or AU, especially when NATO's primary strategic focus has decisively shifted back towards concerns in Eastern Europe and the collective defense of its members.
So this deep dilemma, this strategic crossroads, that's where this analysis tool comes in. Multi-criteria analysis.
Precisely. This profound dilemma is exactly where multi-criteria analysis, or MCA, comes into powerful play. It's not just a theoretical concept, it's a sophisticated, structured approach specifically designed to help political decision-makers and military strategists rigorously rethink the alliance's role in this new, complex environment. MCA, in essence, is a structured decision-making framework built upon clearly defined objectives. It systematically involves identifying specific attributes or indicators that can accurately measure progress towards those objectives, and then objectively determining general preferences among several alternative options for action.
Like a scientific roadmap for strategy.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it as a scientific roadmap. It establishes clear, logical steps to follow to move from a complex, often ambiguous problem to a well-reasoned, data-driven solution. It's not about relying on gut feelings or political expediency alone. It's about systematic, transparent evaluation. While MCA has been widely adopted in fields like project management, economics, civil infrastructure, its application in the military domain, often called multi-criteria decision-making analysis, or MCDA, has truly grown in prominence since around 2010.
MCDA, okay.
Yeah, it's been utilized for everything from optimizing resource allocation in military installations and selecting specialized equipment to supporting the equitable distribution of graduation posts in military education. More recently, it's evolved even further into multi-criteria information analysis, or MCIA, incorporating advanced methods from artificial intelligence and even fuzzy sets theory.
Fuzzy sets theory sounds fuzzy.
Yeah, it might sound a bit abstract, but simply put, it helps analyze situations where the data isn't rigidly black and white, but more nuanced or fuzzy. It allows for a more subtle and realistic assessment of complex variables. So for NATO, applying this modern MCA methodology to a geopolitical analysis aims to standardize and clarify the key elements for determining their strategic interests in Africa, grounding decisions in solid analytical ground.
Okay, so how does it actually work? What are the steps?
Right. The standardized process for multi-criteria geopolitical analysis involves 5 distinct yet interconnected stages. These stages meticulously help establish analytical elements, specify precise calculation methods for criteria and their weighting, and culminate in the creation of the performance matrix, which is really the heart of the analysis. Step 1 is determining the geopolitical issue. This is foundational. As we just discussed, for NATO, this means clearly articulating the fundamental question. Is NATO interested in Africa? If so, what exactly would be the main geostrategic and geoeconomic elements of its interest, and to what level should this interest be prioritized compared to other interests? For any analyst, it's absolutely crucial to deeply understand the source of the main problem, and its myriad influences internal dynamics within Africa, external factors from global powers. It's about ensuring the analysis remains laser-focused on the core challenge.
Got it. Define the problem first. What's step 2?
Step 2 involves defining objectives and criteria. Once the core issue is clear, the next step is to set precise, measurable objectives linked to resolving that issue. Alongside these objectives, criteria are developed. These are the indicators to measure success or failure in achieving those objectives. The strategic objectives identified typically fall into 3 broad categories. First, a political objective, maybe gaining or maintaining influence. Second, an economic objective, focusing on economic projects, increasing physical presence, economic ties, though this can also increase competition, of course. And third, a crucial security objective, strengthening common security by actively reducing risks like terrorism, illegal migration, illicit trafficking. To measure these, both quantitatively and qualitatively, numerous criteria are listed. For example, protecting citizens, reducing local corruption, preventing conflicts, improving transport safety, increasing jobs, reducing illegal migration, reducing terrorist acts, contributing to a sustainable local economy, supporting member state economic growth, facilitating tech access, promoting access to facilities, attracting local support, monitoring impact. Each becomes a measurable data point assessed against different options.
Okay, makes sense. Problem, objectives, criteria. Then step 3 must be the options themselves.
Exactly. Step 3 is establishing options or alternatives. These are the concrete, distinct paths NATO could follow. It's understood that different options will have varying effectiveness and entail different levels of commitment. For NATO's involvement in Africa, researchers identified three concrete options. Option 8.1, continue current political and practical cooperation, basically the status quo. Option 8.2, significantly reinforce NATO-African Union relations, operationalize established measures, substantially increase practical cooperation, a deeper partnership. And option 8.3, plan and conduct direct military involvement, but only at the explicit request of the UN, AU, or EU.
So status quo, deeper partnership, or direct intervention on request. Clear options.
Right. Then step 4 is the collection of data and information. This is crucial because it involves gathering all necessary, accurate, up-to-date info to establish and measure indicators of success for each criterion and objective. Indicators are the numerical measures of how much an alternative contributes to a criterion. This means assigning impact levels maybe on a scale like without impact, minimal, limited, moderate, significant. Experts then meticulously assign weights to these criteria based on their relative importance to NATO's overall strategic goals. It's about methodically quantifying the qualitative aspects of geopolitical engagement.
And step 5 brings it all together.
Precisely. Step 5 is achieving the performance matrix. This is often called the masterpiece of the analysis. Here, all the meticulously collected data is entered into a matrix. Each entry shows the expected performance of a given option against each established criterion. The primary method is direct analysis of the performance of options, allowing a clear examination of how well each alternative performs across all criteria. This matrix also helps visually and numerically verify the dominant position of certain criteria, showing when one option performs better overall. It provides an incredibly clear, actionable overview, making the trade-offs, strengths, and weaknesses of each option transparent for decision makers.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
once this incredibly rigorous multi-criteria analysis was completed for NATO and Africa,
Yeah.
what did it actually reveal? What was the optimal solution that emerged from applying this sophisticated framework? This is where the rubber meets the road, right?
Absolutely. Well, the analysis of NATO's current engagement in and around Africa reveals that it is predominantly politico-military, with a discernibly stronger emphasis on the political and capacity-building aspects than on direct military intervention. This engagement operates primarily through two key initiatives. First, the Mediterranean Dialogue, or MD, launched way back in 1994, includes 7 non-member states in the Med area: Algeria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Mauritania, Morocco, Tunisia, focuses on political dialogue, trust building, practical cooperation on common security interests.
Okay, the MD.
The second key initiative is direct support for the African Union, which began in 2005. This support is carefully framed by NATO's broader conceptual framework for the strategic direction south and primarily aims at enhancing Allied stability by contributing to African-led security solutions. These ongoing efforts have several common objectives, aligning directly with the MCA's Step 2 defining objectives.
Like what specifically?
For instance, providing crucial operational support logistics, finance for AU missions like AMISOM in Somalia, and deploying NATO expert planners to the AU Department of Peace Operations. Another objective, strengthening African defense capabilities through education and training courses at allied facilities, and deploying NATO mobile education and training teams, or MITs, directly to partner countries. Finally, assisting in the comprehensive development of the African Standby Forces, or ASF Africa's own long-term peacekeeping capabilities, through courses, assessments, expert advice, scientific activities to enhance their effectiveness.
And NATO has infrastructure for this.
Yes. To facilitate these goals, NATO established an Allied Liaison Office at the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa in 2015 for direct communication, and a crucial piece of infrastructure, the NATO Center Hub for Strategic Direction South, the NSDS Hub in Naples, Italy, opened in 2017. This hub is absolutely crucial for addressing evolving security issues in NATO's southern neighborhood and strengthening cooperation with partners. Building on this, in 2019, NATO and the AU signed a new cooperation protocol, significantly expanding NATO's support to critical areas like counterterrorism, countering IEDs, women in conflict, enhancing integrity and security structures, and supporting AU-led PSOCs.
Okay, so that's the current engagement. How did the MCA evaluate the options based on that?
Right, bringing it back to the MCA. The analysis rigorously considered the three options: A1, status quo; A2, reinforce NATO-AU relations; and A3, direct military involvement on request. Researchers applied specific criteria C.1 through C.8 to evaluate each. These included practical things like Allied transport support for African troops, C.1, Allied experts in planning, C.2, number of Africans trained, C.3, ASF training activities organized, C.4, Allied command involvement, C.5, degree of crisis mitigation achieved, C.6, attracting local support, C.7, and critically, Allied consensus, C.8.
Allied consensus. That seems key for NATO.
Absolutely key. Each criterion was weighted by experts based on importance, and all the data went into the performance matrix. The results from that performance matrix were quite clear, undeniably so, really. Option A1, continuing current cooperation, scored 29 points. Option A2, reinforcing NATO-AU relations, scored significantly higher with 42 points. And option A3, direct military involvement, scored 31 points.
So A2, reinforcing the partnership, came out clearly on top.
Clearly. The analysis identified the dominant position of certain criteria in the overall success. Specifically, criteria like C4, ASF training activities, C6, crisis mitigation prevention, and especially C8, Allied consensus, were found to be particularly influential. Therefore, the multi-criteria analysis unequivocally revealed the best possible option, option A2, reinforcing NATO-AU relations. This option performed best not just numerically, but strategically, because it most effectively ensures NATO's strategic interest by enhancing African security capabilities and addressing challenges indirectly through partnership and capacity building. Crucially, it does this while simultaneously maintaining a high level of allied unity and consensus, which is paramount for NATO. It's a scientifically argued optimal solution, offering a path that balances effectiveness with political and practical feasibility for the alliance. This wasn't just the highest score, it was the strategic sweet spot, building African capacity, minimizing direct NATO risk, and reinforcing essential allied unity.
So we've gone on quite a journey today, dissecting Africa's incredibly complex, rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. We've explored the urgent, multifaceted reasons for NATO's renewed, intense strategic interest, the resource race, illicit activities, climate change impacts, and we've seen the powerful, methodical role that multi-criteria analysis plays in guiding strategic thought, moving beyond mere intuition to a truly data-driven, systematic approach. This deep dive wasn't just about the what of geopolitics, but profoundly about the how of navigating these complex strategic dilemmas.
And that's a crucial distinction to remember. While the multi-criteria analysis provides a scientifically argued optimal solution in this case, reinforcing NATO-AU relations, the ultimate implementation, the specifics of how that relationship evolves, will always rest with NATO's decision-making authorities. It's a powerful tool, a rigorously tested guide, but the final choice remains a political one, shaped by the consensus and will of the alliance's members. Africa's future is, without a doubt, inextricably linked to global stability. Whether we consider its critical resources, the dynamics of migration, or its evolving security landscape. Given the complex interplay of internal vulnerabilities and external forces we've discussed, what do you think is the single most critical factor for NATO, or indeed any global actor, to prioritize and consider when engaging with the continent beyond the tactical details we've explored today? What's the overarching principle that should guide engagement?